Today, we're going to be talking about AI specifically in business and the impact it's going to have in the next 5 years, 10 years, specifically careers and job displacement in general, and how that's going to affect like the broader economy. So that's a big scope, but we're going to simplify it and make it make sense for you. And before we get into it, there are typically two schools of thought when it comes to AI. Now that AI is no longer a buzzword that generates just like engagement farming, the two schools of thought are really the techno optimists, where people think AI is going to revolutionize the economy and make it so that everyone can be wealthy and super utopic. And then on the other end of the spectrum is the AI doomers. So there's going to be bias in every argument that's made. We're going to try to present the facts as best we can in the most objective way as we can. And so the first thing that I wanted to talk about is the growth of AI, especially in the business world, is going to have several, I guess you could say, major consequences. I picked three, especially in relation to the future of work and job growth. So the first thing is it's going to make work way more efficient. As we were doing research for this, the WEF released a report that by 2030, only about 1/3 of jobs that are heavily impacted by AI is going to be fully humans. So basically what that means is the other 2/3 of that person's workday is either going to be fully automated by 2030, or it's going to be partially automated where they're working in conjecture with AI. The second thing is that it's going to make jobs a lot harder to acquire, and wages are going to slow in growth, which is pretty scary, but it makes sense when you're automating a lot of the high-skilled technical work away with a machine. So by 2030, about 300 million jobs are projected to be displaced globally, and 1/3 of workers are going to see at least half of their work displaced. And now when I say displaced, that doesn't necessarily mean completely wiped away, but what it does mean is that AI, especially in administrative jobs, especially in education, things like accounting, legal, basically bureaucratic jobs, it's going to be heavily impacting all of that knowledge and technical work. And so people are going to see their jobs evolve and change, and you'll probably need a lot smaller of teams in the workplace because a lot of the menial stuff that you would use a entry-level person for or an intern for is going to be automated away. And the third point that I wanted to get your opinion on is that AI is going to make human interactions, especially in deal making and when selling, all the more valuable because people are going to be sick of dealing with robot call centers, AI generated marketing materials, stuff like that. So I kind of want to get your opinion. Why are human interactions going to be more valuable, and what's the broader impact of that in business?
Well, I kind of want to take a step back and not talk about personalization to start, but give some more context on where we are with AI right now and some large pieces of news that recently have been fueling, I think, the direction of AI, particularly in the United States. So one thing that many people may have heard about is the $500 billion joint venture investment between the federal government, NVIDIA, Microsoft, OpenAI, Oracle, and SoftBank. And this is called Project Stargate. Project Stargate intends to build out data centers for AI. So data centers are incredibly important for AI because AI requires a lot of data processing, and it also requires a lot of energy to be able to work. It's very, very energy consumptive. So data centers provide the needed energy for AI operations, similar to when we think of blockchain and crypto. So the 7 hyperscalers of AI, when you think of the Amazons, the Apples, the Microsofts of the world, they're likely going to be using about 35 to 40 gigawatts of power in about 2030. for AI usage, which means they need a lot of data centers. 1 million gigawatts of power will light up 1 million American homes, for context. So 40 million gigawatts is 40 million homes that you could essentially be lighting up, which are now going to fuel the AI usage of these companies. So Project Stargate. The intentions are to build 20 of these data centers in the United States themselves. So far, $100 billion has been invested jointly between all of these companies and the federal government, and 10 data centers are now being built. 20 would be the ultimate goal. It's very interesting as well, just from a business context, how all these companies interplay with each other. So Microsoft is a large backer of OpenAI, one of the partners. They're both partners in this. OpenAI uses GPUs from NVIDIA. Microsoft also uses GPUs from NVIDIA in their Azure data centers. So Project Stargate said that it would create 100,000 jobs in the US job market, which seems like a large number, but it's actually very small. And when you get the entire context to Ashton's point on how it's going to replace jobs in the future, AI itself, it's very interesting. Project Stargate will likely replace 5 million plus US jobs, specialized jobs, once it is fully developed, all 20 data centers and the fuel for these 7 hyperscalers. The 100,000 jobs that it creates are going to be for construction in the short term of these 20 data centers and operations of these data centers. Once these data centers are actually built out, they actually need very small teams to operate them, very small teams. So it creates 100,000 short-term jobs within that time frame and scope, from now to 2030. So from 2025 to 2030, but it displaces about 5 million in the long-term plus. Very interesting. With that being said, that's going to be millions of people who are displaced from their work and now need to find a new job. The job markets within the next 5-10 years in the United States are going to look drastically different than they do now. Marketing and sales and jobs of that scope, even data science, data analysts, engineers, all of that's going to be displaced. So there has to be an antidote somehow to be able to replace these jobs and create new ones in the market. How do you think that that's going to happen?
So when you look at the Department of Commerce, they came out with a report late last year talking about the most affected jobs, which are basically what you just laid out. Things with high intellectual skill, technological skill, and the least affected jobs, at least in the short term, is going to be labor jobs. Problem is that the entire economic thesis in terms of manufacturing of the United States, since a little bit past World War II, I think in the 60s this kind of started, is beginning to outsource all of our manufacturing and industry to East Asia, Southeast Asia, Latin America. And what this did was it made goods easier to consume, and it lowered the labor costs for corporations. So it was a win-win for the people and companies. And the problem with this, as we're starting to see now, is that a lot of our manufacturing is in the hands of our geopolitical enemies, as we're no longer the at least full global hegemon anymore. The rise of China and other different powers throughout the world has been influencing the global trade networks, and that's sort of behind Trump's wild tariff idea, but that's a story for another day. Essentially, what this all boils down to is if you have a population where the majority of their work is corporate and service-based, when that is disrupted, you have a lot of people out of jobs and a lot of angry people. And that could lead to disaster, especially as the cost of living has been exponentially increasing to where it's now basically level with the average annual wage. And so how do you fix that? What's an antidote? Reindustrialization of the United States. Now, there's a lot of factors that go into that, and I know you want to touch on that, but labor jobs are going to be the least affected. If we reindustrialize, bring manufacturing back here, and we open up hundreds of thousands, millions of jobs by starting to produce our own things again, it will take a lot of upfront cost and a lot of time. But that is the only way to at least give a slight bit of alleviation to all of these people who are going to be losing their jobs. I don't know if you want to make another point to that.
Yeah. So during the gold rush, the people that made the most money weren't the speculative miners of gold. It was actually two sectors: the owners of the land themselves, and then also the equipment providers. So there was a popular saying that came out of that time, which is that when everybody's digging for gold, sell them shovels. So that would be the best way of looking at this when it comes to manufacturing and industrialization. The CHIPS Act, which was put into place in 2022 by the Biden administration, authorized about $280 billion in funding, research, and subsidies into manufacturing of US semiconductors and to boost our operations there. That, for the last couple of weeks, has come under scrutiny by the Trump administration. But what is looking like will happen is that the CHIPS Act will likely just be rebranded under the Trump administration and controlled by the United States Investment Accelerator under the Commerce Department. So why is that important? Well, in the same manner that all of this AI needs data centers to be able to fuel their operations, they're also going to need a ton of chips and semiconductors, and any new technologies that are created will need the same. And the best thing that we can do is leverage the CHIPS Act and make these manufacturing centers for semiconductors in the United States themselves. NVIDIA already has intentions on this, as well as several other companies. If we can satisfy the burgeoning demand for AI with supply of semiconductors, homegrown and homemade in the United States, then there would be millions of jobs that are labor oriented in the manufacturing realm that could be opened up here in the United States themselves. And there are government subsidies already out there to be able to fuel this. That's one side of the equation. In our last episode, we touched a little bit on tariffs and how Trump is using them as leverage over other global superpowers. One of the major markets that is affected by tariffs is the automotive market. And the automotive market is incredibly segregated when it comes to the production of vehicle parts. They come from all over the world for your average vehicle: a BMW, a Ford, a Toyota. These parts will come from Europe, they'll come from Asia, they'll come from Canada, they'll come from Mexico, some in the United States, but everywhere. This segregation has made it very, very expensive to produce and create cars and vehicles, and expensive for the US market to be able to buy, the consumer market to be able to purchase vehicles because of the movement of parts from here to here to here to here and all the sourcing and procurement. The automotive industry would have a boon if we can shore up a portion of these manufacturing operations of these parts that are segregated in other nations right now in other countries, and reshore them here to the United States as well. So semiconductors and automotive parts are two huge industries that are very much in the news right now, very much affected by two different reasons, but in the future can provide, if used correctly, a lot of jobs to the American market.
And one more point to make on that, especially with the CHIPS Act, one of the biggest things that is of critical importance to us is the manufacturing of high-level consumer goods. So chips, high-level electronics, things that are extremely valuable that require precious metals that we typically get from East Asia, Taiwan, China, etc. If we can produce those here, then we don't even necessarily have to fully reindustrialize the lower level, lower quality consumer goods, and we can outsource that simply to Mexico or South America. We won't need China to produce all of our electronics and high-level instruments that actually makes our country work. So that way, we can still get the benefit of paying out lower wages because we have workers in South America producing cheaper and less intricate parts, while simultaneously not relying on any other country out of our hemisphere on the high level parts. So you could see a dynamic where we still have pretty or relatively cheap, lower quality consumer goods that are produced within our hemisphere. So we still get that benefit while simultaneously getting all of our higher level stuff being produced here as opposed to in a potentially compromising place.
Going back to what Ashton had asked me earlier on how AI will be a boon for personalization. Well, AI is being leveraged. We go to a ton of different conferences. The sector that we operate in is in supply chain. And so we get exposed very, very heavily to the retail and consumer good markets. So we get to go to conferences where all of these CEOs, chief operating officers, chief marketing officers are speaking on the future of the retail industry and the consumer good industry, which is relevant to everybody. And where everybody is heading is using AI to streamline their operations, to streamline their communications, to create copy, which is their own marketing, verbiage and their messaging to consumers. And you can tell pretty quickly when something is written by AI. Even when artificial general intelligence is created, it likely still won't have the emotional capabilities to be able to deliver a message that's fully human. So one interesting thing from an esoteric lens is AI will likely create at least my hypothesis, our hypothesis is that AI will likely create a counter movement of hyper-personalization where people are looking for the real world and real things and real experiences, but real interactions with real humans and a real human touch, because it will just have a different type of feel. AI cannot write like you do. It cannot feel what you feel, can't think how you think. And this may seem pie in the sky and almost a progressive feeling, but hyper personalization is going to be a key going forward in any type of sales messaging, any type of marketing messaging, any type of content that's put out there and meant to be consumed by another person. So there will be a premium in the future, most likely on things that are written by humans.
Absolutely. And that kind of brings it full circle to where the number one commodity in a world of automation, optimization, and utilizing robotics and our own creations in everyday life is going to be each other. You see that in the internet now, where there's almost this psychological pandemic that people feel incredibly lonely, even though we're technically more connected than ever. So that's our basic thesis on AI, why we think it is going to change the entire world of business and what that implicates, especially when it comes to how people are going to live in the future and work in the future, and what people are really going to value once this is fully implemented. So stay tuned for next week's episode. Thanks for watching.